are designed to deal with animate threats. Maybe there's that. But that aside, what do you think of, do you know what I mean? This business of kind of resurrecting the language, even though the language no longer means the reassuring things it meant, right? Is that useful? I'm skeptical of that.
It depends. Jonathan is arguing for something between the metaphorical and the literal, which
now that's the demon guy, Jonathan
Pageau. Pageau, good friend of mine. He's arguing for something in between what we typically mean by merely metaphorical and literal, which he calls the symbolic. And the whole idea of the symbolic is that it is pointing to real patterns that are often only accessible through an imaginal way. You said, think about IFS, one of the...
Which stands for?
Internal Family Systems Therapy. I've been through it, participant observation, where what you learn to do is you learn when there's sort of inner conflict, you try and allow the part that you are in conflict. And I have to do this because that's part of what gets called into question by this practice. You are in dialogue with it, and you sort of, you personify it to degree, and you enter into a dialogue with it, and very powerful results can come out of it. And so let me try and first argue on Jonathan's behalf. Give me a moment, and then I'll try and then address your question. So, is it becoming a plausible case within, bona fide mainstream cognitive science that there is a collective intelligence shared by distributed cognition that's not just the sum of the individual agents' intelligence? Yes.
This is a result of human intellectual collaboration, or
yes,
like General Motors is a collective intelligence.
Right, but also the idea that there's a synergistic effect. It's not just an additive effect.
Right.
And so you have this collective intelligence, and I've published on this recently. Dan Schiappa and I, we talked about the NASA scientists, right, and moving the rovers around on Mars, and how they form with the rovers this overall system that is actually doing the navigation of the rover and the science. So, is it becoming reasonable that there's a collective agent and a kind of we agency? This is taken very seriously. Is it possible that people had sort of a symbolic sense of this in the past and talked about it in terms of God? Well, that's an old hypothesis. That's Durkheim. Again, that's nothing radical. That people personified this in order to interact with it, and there's probably good reasons why personification and narrative actually get your cognition in the right way for tracking very complex dynamical systems. Now, does Jonathan think that they are real beyond all of that? At times I hear him saying no, at times I'm hearing yes, and I'm trying to get clear about that. If you ask me, do I think these demons or angels exist without human beings? I give a very clear no. I do not think they do. But I do not think we are just speaking metaphorically. We are trying to use something to point to something. I would put it to you that in some sense, that's what this is the Durkheimian proposal. That's what people were doing in the past too. They weren't just fiction, right, that was reassuring. That it also put them into contact with real dynamical systems, real, suprapersonal collective intelligence in a way that was facilitatory for them. And so I don't think it's completely de novo that we're using words like demon and angels to talk about these things. And then is it possible that we're doing something that we always do with the meaning of terms? We're picking up on one dimension that's always been prominent, or always been present, and making it more prominent now. Yeah, and that's a legitimate thing to do. We do that in science. We do that in religion. Now, so the question becomes a very messy, difficult question about how can you tell whether or not we are doing that legitimately or not? And I agree with you. That's a very hard question. And I don't have a clear answer to you other than I keep trying my very best to participate in good faith dialogue with all of these people to see if I can take their perspective. And I don't mean in a pretentious way. I mean in an authentic and respectful way in order to answer that question. And I don't think that groups like Decoding the Gurus understand how much this requires participant observation if you're going to make an actual authentic critique. I'm not accusing you of anything, Bob. I'm just answering your question.
Yeah. No, I'm not a host of Decoding the Gurus. I've been on the show. They've been on my show. I you know, and I have to say I find the podcast enjoyable, but I take your point that you know, if you want to understand exactly what you were up to in talking about demons, you need to listen to the whole conversation you were having.
Yeah.
And that's on YouTube, right?
Yes, it is. It is.